Good morning, Blues. For Monday, the 31st of March, 2025. It's the start of another week, and it's the start of the week where Chelsea finally return to Premier League action. Going to be building up to that game on Thursday at the Bridge against Spurs. It's a huge game, and we're going to speak about that game and the rest of the Premier League fixtures actually a little bit later in today's show, because there is quite a bit to get through, and it's such a huge run for Chelsea. And also gauging your thoughts in the comments below of where your head's at. Has the distance between the Arsenal game and where we are now made you feel better, made you feel worse? We'll dive into that. I also want to talk in today's show about two players currently at Strasbourg, and that is Djordje Petrovic and Andrey Santos. Some outstanding performances from them under Rosenior. And of course, there are some complications there with Strasbourg and Chelsea both getting in the Champions League. But mainly just looking at those two players, and the numbers around them recently are quite incredible, and whether both of them will be contributing to the first team next season. So we're going to get into all of that. Please do like, subscribe as we do head back into Chelsea playing some football. I also just quickly want to say and shout out that many of you, I'm sure, know I do have a Substack, but from this week, we're doing subscriptions on it. So there's going to be some paid content, but there still is going to be at least one article free per week on my Substack. So if you do want to financially support the show for basically the cost of a coffee you can get in London, £4 a month, you get those exclusive member posts. But also, I will be uploading podcasts with Chelsea guests early onto Substack. So if you want to get early access when I have those long form conversations with Chelsea guests like Joe Tweeds, like Liam Toomey and others, please do go and subscribe. And also check out today's piece. The launch piece today for kind of this new era of my Substack is all about the stadium. There's been so much discourse, and you might be surprised where I fall down by the end of that piece. So link in the description box below. Let's start off with Djordje Petrovic. Djordje Petrovic, some of the numbers around him, and I'll put this up on screen now in terms of passes completed, in terms of prevented goals. In Liga, he is top of the class. I mean, in terms of his comparison to keepers in that league who maybe should be doing better than him, it is quite remarkable, especially passes completed. Now, whether that factors into him being a good goalkeeper or not, I'm not entirely sure that's really something you should be figuring, and saying is the most important thing. But it kind of does show that this is a keeper who has, I think, obviously developed this year and should still be at Chelsea. I still maintain this. I would have had no issue with Djordje Petrovic going on loan, having the performances he has for Strasbourg under Rosenior, developing a side of his game that was probably weak last season, refining parts of his game that were strong but needed some work. If Chelsea's current goalkeeping situation was a lot better, if we didn't have Robert Sanchez as our first choice, I think I could have stomached that. I think a lot of you could have. The issue is we've literally loaned out our most competent and strongest keeper from last year, and we've left ourselves in a terrible situation. That's the thing that just infuriates me, and it infuriates me that I could have told you this in the summer. Like, you didn't need to work within football. You didn't need to have advanced analytics to kind of predict what was going to happen with Chelsea's goalkeeping situation, which is infuriating. But I do think it is nice that at the very least Petrovic has gone from a place where he was kind of part of the bomb squad. It almost was like the Strasbourg loan was kind of a last resort by the end of the window, because he was so excommunicated from Enzo Maresca's plans in favour of Robert Sanchez that I think Strasbourg was just kind of like the convenient end to that window for him. But it's actually turned out to be a brilliant place for him under Rosenior. And as we're seeing with many players at Strasbourg at the moment, they're doing wonderfully well. And he's getting that first team football. He's developing. And I kind of think with Djordje Petrovic, he is the kind of player that Chelsea should be building around in terms of, or at least these are the players that I'm told we're supposed to be buying, which makes it even more infuriating that he's not at the club at the moment. And being at Strasbourg is not being at Chelsea, even if we are connected in terms of ownership. But no, like, being at Chelsea is what matters most to me as a Chelsea fan, and I think it probably should to you, right? Like, that's the end goal, right? He should be a Chelsea player if he's going to be good enough. But he is someone that you looked at him last year. He's raw. He's a young goalkeeper. keepers are very different to outfield players in terms of their longevity, in terms of their development, in terms of their ability to get minutes. It can be a bit of a bottleneck if you're a young keeper and you're behind an established number one. But he got himself in front of Robert Sanchez, and I thought by the end of last season, he'd done a really good job. Like, not flawless. None of that was the case for Chelsea last year, but like a bunch of young players, you could see something to buy into and to further develop. And my hope is we can kind of get back on the right path with Petrovic this summer. He returns to Chelsea. Now, whether he returns to Chelsea as number one or Chelsea go out and seriously sign a number one, then we factor that in. But I think, if I was to build the Chelsea squad right now, Petrovic has to at least be in our goalkeeping department. He has to be added back to the options next year. I think both of the first choice or the keepers in the first team squad, I wouldn't mind both of them being let go, Philip Jorgensen and Sanchez. I think Jorgensen, at the very least, you can still defend Jorgensen somehow and say he's young, we haven't seen that much of him. Sanchez is a no-go. Sanchez has to be sold this summer. It's kind of undeniable. So Petrovic comes back, and maybe, just maybe, if Chelsea still aren't going to go out there and sign a massive number one, I think Petrovic would be my number one going into next year. That doesn't mean he's world class, but I still think, just competent-wise, you could kind of argue, look at his performances over the last 2 seasons, and you can build, hopefully, to a better future with him than Sanchez, which you're just not going to get. So I'm really happy for Petrovic as an individual. I think he's proven himself. I'm not denying, there are parts of his game he's clearly developed, especially on the ball. That was probably the biggest criticism people had of him. But I think in terms of what should matter with a goalkeeper, he was far more superior in all of those metrics and all of those, I just think, key components of what I deem to be a good goalkeeper compared to his competition last year. So hopefully, a good thing for the club is we're going to course correct back to Petrovic becoming a Chelsea keeper once again. And I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. But whether you think he will be as number one or number two, and who that number one could be if Chelsea sign someone else. The other guy, I mean, he's the star of the moment. I almost think, like, for some people, he's kind of like Chelsea's player of the season, even though he hasn't played for Chelsea, is Andrey Santos. He is the name that gets brought up so consistently. Data MB brought up this list of kind of where he is versus top 5 league under 21 midfielders. And this is remarkable, really. Most forward passes, most interceptions, most possession won, most possessions won and lost, most forward passes completed, most non-penalty goals, most headed goals, most goals in terms of XG, most fouls suffered, and highest duels won. This is an incredible season for Andrey Santos. His second half of last season was really impressive. This is a absolutely no-brainer open goal. If you miss it, you should be fired type situation. If Chelsea do not reintegrate Andrey Santos properly back into the first team, heading into the Club World Cup, the summer, and of course the next Premier League season. This is a godsend, I think, for Chelsea, because in many ways the midfield is still a problematic area in terms of depth, but also in terms of profile, in terms of a player that you could get in there that's box to box, could be offensive, actually contribute something in the final third, but also add that physical side to the game that midfield has lacked for a long period of time, maybe some protection to others. I think all of this makes Santos, again, just a bit of a, I'm not going to call him a saviour, because that's putting way too much pressure on his shoulders, but at the very least, a player who I could just feasibly, just realistically see improve our options and make our squad stronger, not weaker next season. And he's obviously contributing a lot at the moment. I think Liam Rosenior, I have to say, just on a side note, I've always been a fan of Liam Rosenior. I remember listening to him speak. He was a pundit for Sky after his playing career ended. I think Hull was the last team he played for. And I just thought he came across as just a very intelligent, thoughtful, considered football mind. And it hasn't surprised me that he's gone into coaching and he's been successful in it, because I think he is very intelligent, and I think he is someone that clearly I think is going like that in terms of his career. And what he's done at Strasbourg is, sure, there are similarities between play style, but I think Strasbourg are a lot more direct and a lot more of the style of football I'd like to see Chelsea play. And I think that's aided obviously by players like Andrey Santos, who are forward thinking, who will take a shot from distance, who, are just a more forward thinking and just more simplistic team. I don't mean that offensively. Like they just cut out a lot of the nonsense that doesn't need to be there. And of course, Champions League football is within their reach, which makes some interesting reading if you've seen Matt Law's most recent piece, whether if Chelsea and Strasbourg both get Champions League football, what's going to happen? And it seems like Chelsea's ownership would have to pull out their involvement with Strasbourg, more so than they would at Chelsea, which may annoy some people. Because listen, that really would be the icing, the cherry on top of this embarrassing cake if Chelsea somehow get Champions League football and it somehow turns out we miss out to our satellite club, because that's not really how multi-clubs, which I don't like the multi-club system. I don't think it's good for football in general, but it's not supposed to work out. The way they're supposed to work out is you have a club at the top of it, and that's supposed to be Chelsea. But obviously Santos and Petrovic, and particularly Santos, I know so many people are so excited. And a little bit different to Esteval, Santos has had now very decent, very consistent European level football, and I think France to England is as Joe Tweeds has put it before, and I agree with him because I just think there's a lot of evidence to it. I think that's a good comparison and a good transition for him, and I just think physically, you just look at the attributes in his game all round, I could see them very much transferring to the Premier League and becoming quite impressive and quite impactful very quickly. Question of the day for you regarding Santos, in terms of that midfield, what would be your midfield three or kind of your midfield configuration moving into next year with Santos? Because I've already seen debates about, Enzo Fernandez versus Andrey Santos. Why does it have to be versus? Why, there is a scenario where those three players, Caicedo, Enzo Fernandez and Andrey Santos, all start in a midfield together and in some ways could complement each other. But I understand why, because we're talking about kind of two attack-minded midfielders, or at least two progressive midfielders, two players who, in terms of, Caicedo can play that holding role whilst Enzo Fernandez can't. I think Santos could even play that holding role. Enzo Fernandez can't, which kind of limits maybe where you put Enzo Fernandez in the team. The final thing I want to speak about before we wrap up today's show is, of course, we're on the eve of the return of the Premier League. Premier League games start happening from tomorrow night. Chelsea's is obviously Thursday, so a little bit of time. But I'm going to be releasing a piece on Substack where I break down every single game between now and the end of the season. That's Premier League games. I'm not really looking at the Conference League because it's still a knockout competition. So, and Chelsea should be winning the Conference League. I kind of think there isn't much more to say other than that. Chelsea are the strongest team left in the competition. It's an embarrassment if we don't win that competition. What, of course, is more up for stakes and in terms of jeopardy, of course, it's the Premier League. So we've got 9 games left. Spurs at home, Brentford away, Ipswich at home, Fulham away, Everton at home, Liverpool at home, Newcastle away, Man United at home, and we finish against Nottingham Forest. When you break down each game individually, it's an awkward run for Chelsea. It really is. And I don't think I'm being negative when I say, based on Chelsea's current level of performance, if Chelsea maintain what they've been doing basically since mid to late December, we will not get Champions League football. The only way Chelsea would get Champions League football in that scenario is if kind of what's also happened is that everyone else continues to fail, which is a huge risk. A huge risk that Man City's form doesn't pick up. They've just got through to the FA Cup semi-final. You've got, Aston Villa. Newcastle, I think, is kind of the biggest threat for me looking at their fixtures. Looking at this, I mean, I'm actually not that negative in terms of I gave sort of my endpoints tally, which will be revealed on Wednesday in that piece that I'll release, and we'll probably talk about it on the show as well on Wednesday morning show. I don't think I'm that negative in truth in terms of where I'm putting Chelsea. But what I would say is that there are some obvious wins within here and a lot of weight is being put on the home games. Effectively, if Chelsea continue their away form, which it basically means not winning another away game because we haven't won one since away to Spurs in early December, then, I mean, you have to basically be flawless at home, and that means beating Spurs, Ipswich, Everton, Liverpool and Man United. Not impossible, but especially the Liverpool one, kind of improbable. And I look at teams like Everton, who I do think are quite stubborn, are going to probably produce a game that Enzo Maresca's side have struggled with. Brentford away, Brentford haven't won at home since Chelsea's last Premier League away win. So narratively, there's a nice little cog there in terms of will we have one or the other records finally being broken, Brentford winning at home or Chelsea winning away, or we get a draw. And it's also a ground Chelsea have really struggled with. Ipswich, again, embarrassing. We lost to them earlier in the year. It has to be 3 points. Fulham are a team that are only currently 4 points away from Chelsea, which is not great. When you look at that's the other thing you have to factor in with this closing run of the season. The margins between finishing 4th, 5th, or as low as 10th are pretty thin at this time of the year. Of course, a lot has to come in there. Fulham have to keep playing well. Chelsea have to kind of drastically lose a lot of their games. And what you don't want to do is, if you're just looking at Chelsea fixtures, which obviously is the thing we most care about, you are then kind of assuming that everyone else is flawless, which, based on the evidence of this season, I know Chelsea kind of disproved this theory last year in that you can kind of massively change your form in the last few weeks of the year and it suddenly looks a lot different. But I kind of think what teams have been to this point of the year are usually what they're going to be. That doesn't mean they won't have a run of wins, but it's just, if you've seen persistent flaws, I think those persistent flaws will likely remain. Likely. Not for certain, but likely will remain at this point. And I think that's why there will be some variation and probably will be margin for error for Chelsea, because it's not just 4th place this year, it's 5th place. So Chelsea do have kind of a safety net that they don't need to match probably the points total that was needed for 4th place last year, and they might still get Champions League football. But I do just want to end on this. Chelsea need to get Champions League football. If they fail to get Champions League football, I think many others, and I think probably you should as well, deem this season a failure, or at the very least a major disappointment, based on where Chelsea were in December and based on just where we were this time last year. I don't think it's acceptable for Chelsea, if we're just talking about points, for Chelsea to end on a lower points total. But there is right now a potential of that happening, which would make for interesting reading, and then what happens going into the summer. I think that, Maresca needs to adapt. I think he needs to try and reconfigure and inspire something that was there pre-Christmas. The unfortunate thing is I have seen a lot of this team since then, and there's been very little sign of that happening. But maybe the returns of Jackson. I do think the return of Jackson and Madueke are going to be a difference maker. Not in terms of, I'm not saying those players are saviours. That's not the point I'm trying to make. I think in terms of Jackson making Chelsea a more balanced football team, and I think Madueke too, maybe could, spark something. And obviously, I think the most defining part of all this is Cole Palmer. If Cole Palmer can find his form again, I think Chelsea have a great chance of ending this season well. If he fails to, I think it's unlikely to get Chelsea get Champions League football. Again, quite basic, quite obvious, but I think it needs to be said. And I think it's quite obvious at the moment, because it's very difficult to see where, out of the current group and the way they're performing, inspiration is going to come from, other than Marc Cucurella. So hopefully Cucurella can keep on scoring. But that's a lot of pressure on a left back. So those are my thoughts today. I hope you have a great rest of Monday. Check out my Substack. If you want to subscribe, £4 a month, you get a lot of content in there, written and video and podcast content. Please do like, subscribe. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.